Well, good day. So I'm doing part 2 of the Weed ID video for the Peace Region AAAF training. So if you have not watched part 1 yet, I would highly recommend that you start with that. Watch part 1 because there's a lot of information that's shared in that part that you're going to need. My name is Norm Boulay. I'm a certified crop advisor and agricultural fieldman for the MD of Smoky River. I have been an appointed weed inspector for over 30 years, and doing this Weed ID video was a request from the Peace Region AAAF. I do want to dedicate this video series to a lady who is a mentor, a friend, and a colleague. Susan Karakanich was a weed inspector, assistant fieldman, and agricultural fieldman for the MD of Greenview for over 30 years. Susan taught me more about plants and weed identification than any other person or book did. So really what Susan didn't know about plants and plant identification quite simply wasn't worth knowing. So this video is dedicated to you, Susan, and I expect that God's garden has never been so clean. For a quick recap, from part 1, I would highly recommend that you get a copy of the Norm's Weed Identification Quick Reference from your fieldman or Weed ID lead. Zoom in on that. Because I do try to key things out by family, and there is some good information in there as far as keying things out. When I do look at books, they tend to be either Weeds of Canada and Northern US, or Plants of the Western Boreal, Weeds of the West, and Weeds of Quebec, as well as the Wheatland County Weed ID Invasive Species Guide, which has all of the invasive species, prohibited noxious and noxious weeds covered under the Weed Control Act. In part 1, I did mention albertainvasives.ca as a good source. You may recall I was struggling with a Dame's rocket identification because the Weeds of Canada, which was the only book I had that actually had Dame's rocket in it, didn't mention that the lower leaves on Dame's rocket could have short stalks. The albertainvasives.ca information on Dame's rocket does say it can have short stalks. If I had looked at that earlier, I would have not struggled with that identification. So kind of a little bit of a heads up, you don't want to count on only one particular resource, and that would be counting me as a resource. Also in part 1, I didn't state emphatically enough that not all plants with milky sap are in the sunflower family. The spurge family and the dogbane family both have plants with milky sap, and the leafy spurge, cypress spurge, are also noted as having alternate leaves, although they're usually so leafy, like toadflax, that it's really hard to tell if they're alternate. They look like they have leaves everywhere. Dogbane is a native plant with opposite leaves, and you'll see when it goes into flower, it has a really cute little white pinkish bell-type flower, very sweet smelling, and the latex, that's milky sap, in both spurge and dogbane are both toxic. Cypress spurge, leafy spurge have been noted to cause blindness, which can either be temporary or permanent. So you definitely want to be cautious if you're finding a plant. You're not thinking that it's in the sunflower family. If you're thinking maybe you found a spurge, make sure you wash your hands very carefully afterwards. Do not wipe your eyes after touching those plants. Also didn't mention in the last video that in the sunflower mustard families, they're not the only plants or only families that have alternate leaves and round stems. There are other plants, like the figwort family, toadflax, that can be noted as having alternate leaves and round stems. And we also have a lot of native lilies that are round stemmed and have alternate leaves. So I think once you see those plants, you're going to know right away, no, they're not sunflower or mustard family plants. But just a warning, just because it has round stems and alternate leaves doesn't mean that it's mustard or sunflower. So we're going to look at a few more families. So I just wanted to make a clarification or correction from my part 1 video where I talked about Canada thistle, and apparently what I said was you're not going to find it. And that's not what I meant at all. What I meant is you're not likely to find Canada thistle seedlings, as in something that has cotyledons on it that grew from seed. Canada thistle primarily grows from the root system. So here's a nice little young plant. It's a shoot. It came from that underground creeping root system. Because it's a shoot, it won't have any cotyledons. It didn't come from seed. But again, there's that nice white downy backing on the leaf, and spiny to almost soft to touch. Now we are looking at the figwort or Scophyllariaceae family. The main weed that we have of concern in figwort is common yellow toadflax. And you'll notice it has linear leaves. The books say they are alternate. What I find is it is so leafy you can almost not tell. It's got leaves all the way around. It makes it look like it's whorled, it's opposite, it's alternate, what I call confused. It's just got leaves everywhere. So long, linear, really no prominent midrib, kind of a grayish green I find. If you open it up, no milky sap whatsoever. If you were more into southern Alberta and you had a plant that looked like this with the milky sap, you would definitely be looking at leafy or cypress spurge. So common yellow toadflax. The other toadflax you might run into is Dalmatian toadflax, and the leaves are much stubbier, almost heart-shaped, clasping the stem, and it doesn't tend to branch out underground as much as common yellow. The Dalmatian tends to be more of a bunch with rhizomes that are just spreading from that bunch very tightly. If you go to Banff National Park or Jasper National Park, you'll see Dalmatian toadflax. I find it's actually quite a pretty plant. So with common yellow toadflax, what you will often find is a creeping rhizome sending up new shoots. This is usually very shallow, so like when people were cultivating, it actually did a fairly decent job of controlling it, other than if you didn't do a good job of cultivating, you could just drag it around and create new plants. But here, you know, we've got a little piece that's 5-6 inches long, and you look at the number of shoots that it's sending out, and again, here's our example of a skeleton that a person might go, oh, there's that toadflax patch. Toadflax quite often doesn't show up until later in the season. So when people are out there seeding and doing their pre-seed burn off with herbicide, they usually don't get toadflax because it's usually not out of the ground yet. Okay, so cleavers, we've talked about. Definitely you're looking at a plant that has a square stem, and it's extremely obvious when you roll it in your fingers that it is square. The leaf arrangement is whorled. In this case you're looking at 8 leaflets, 7 leaflets, 6 leaflets. There's really no definite pattern on that. Whereas if you're looking at the bedstraw family, then you're looking at 4 leaflets. It would be a northern bedstraw. Think about the 4 points of the compass. North is one of them. 4 leaflets is northern. 5 or 6 would be sweet scented. Cleavers is the only weed that we have a concern in the bedstraw family, and it's not noxious weed or prohibited noxious weed, but it is a concern in people's canola primarily because it downgrades the canola. It can't be separated, the seed is the same size, and the oil loses value if you end up with too much cleavers in it. With cleavers, you have the whorled leaf arrangement, you have the square stem. They're also very bristly. They have downward pointing bristles. You take it and you throw it against your colleague's shirt, usually they'll stick. So you know right away that's a cleavers. It is cleaving to something. In this family, in the bedstraw family, we do have some native bedstraw plants. So again, you're dealing with plants that are square stemmed, have a whorled leaf arrangement, which is, this one's pretty busy, so I'm not sure how well that shows up. But whorled leaf arrangement, square stem, these are much more erect than what you usually find with cleavers. Cleavers is usually only erect when it's climbing up on other plants. These are native. If you see 4 leaflets in a whorl, you're looking at northern bedstraw. So think of that from the 4 points of the compass. One of the points is north. This is northern because it only has 4 leaflets. If you're looking at 5 or 6 leaflets, chances are it's sweet scented bedstraw. Probably the claim to fame for the bedstraw is, at a glance, you could definitely mistake this for toad flax. Another family of plants that we definitely run into up in the Peace region is the mint family. And we don't have any noxious weeds or prohibited noxious weeds in the mint family, but you will run into things like hemp nettle and American dragonhead. Hemp nettle, annual plant, you'll find it often in your freshly seeded canola, your cereals. You'll find right away it has a square stem. This one appears to be really bristly. But it's not really so much bristly as hairy, but when you roll it in your fingers, you'll find right away it's a very, very obvious, very distinctive square stem. So how do you tell this from the bedstraw family? The mint family has opposite leaves. So when you're looking at the leaf arrangement, every time a leaf comes out, you have 2 leaves that come out. And you'll notice that they are quite often at 90 degrees from the other. So you rarely see a mint family plant that has 3 or 5 leaves unless it's gotten eaten off by something. It's going to have 2, 4, 6, 8. An even number of leaves. So mint family, you will find hemp nettle, you'll find American dragonhead. That one is a biennial typically, so you'll usually find it more in a forage crop where it can be a bit of a problem as far as not being able to be separated, but nothing particularly worrisome. Probably to me the big claim to fame for, say, hemp nettle is the cotyledons look fairly similar to new canola. So a farmer might be looking at his field thinking that he or she has a really good catch of canola, and instead they have a few canola with a lot of hemp nettle. So we're back in the mint family. This plant is called American dragonhead. It's in bloom when we are, currently the 12th of June. So it's pretty early, and it's early because it's a biennial. So back into the mint family, we have square stems, we have opposite leaves. I mean, these don't quite look like a mint, but they're definitely nicely serrated, or softly serrated. And you get into that mint family flower. This one happens to be kind of a lavender, light purple. Usually you'll find this in second year, so forage crops, alfalfa, clovers, grass crops, and that's usually where it causes a problem because of the seed separation. The next family that we're going to deal with is the buckwheat family. We don't deal with very many weeds in the buckwheat family. Wild buckwheat, you'll see it pretty much everywhere. It's really a problem in wheat more than anything because it's very difficult to separate the seed of buckwheat out of wheat. But when you've got that kind of spade-shaped leaf, you're pretty much guaranteed that you're in the buckwheat family. Or you could be in the morning glory family, but if you're in the morning glory family, look to where the leaf or the stems meet the main stem and look for a kind of a papery sheath called ochrea. All the buckwheat family plants have ochrea. If you're in the morning glory family, you won't find ochrea. Buckwheat is very easy to identify even very early. You'll have one spade-shaped leaf, and then you'll have a couple of cotyledons that are quite long, and they will be set off usually at about 120-degree angle. So aren't you glad you took math and learned how to use a protractor? Now you know what 120 degrees looks like, and you know that you're in the buckwheat, or specifically wild buckwheat. So here we have a really nice example of what is called ochrea. The buckwheat family has that papery sheath where the leaf joins the stem. So if you're looking at any plant that has ochrea, you're pretty much guaranteed you are in the buckwheat family. This one is curled dock. Usually you'll see it in pastures, in wet areas, and skeletons will be tall, reddish, lots of seeds on them. But a really good example, buckwheat family, ochrea. It's not going to be that obvious, say on wild buckwheat or Tartary buckwheat, but it just gives you a really nice shot of what it looks like as a comparison to where there would be no papery sheath, then you're not in the buckwheat family. So again, in that Polygonaceae family, buckwheat family, we have smartweed. Right away you'll notice it has ochrea, so you know you're in that buckwheat family. Smartweed, we will run into a number of them. Green smartweed, also known, well, lady's thumb, pretty much the same. You've got water smartweed, that'll obviously be growing in water. Long leaves, alternate, but really as soon as you see the ochrea, you know you're dealing with the smartweed or buckwheat family. So another family that we will deal with is the goosefoot or chenopod family. Lamb's quarters would be a plant that you would run into quite often. It's called goosefoot because if you look at the leaves on, say, a lamb's quarters and a few others in the family, it kind of resembles a track that a goose's foot would make. Lamb's quarters, you'll see that goosefoot quite often. You'll see kind of a sparkly dusting, especially on the new growth. The stems are not really round, they're almost flattened on one side, and then they'll do a 90-degree twist where your next set of leaves will come out at a 90-degree angle. It is alternate, but it almost looks on this plant to be opposite, but it's considered to be alternate leaves. The stems quite often will have a reddish striping to them, and you'll find that on pretty much anything in the family that we deal with. So Russian thistle, kochia. Kochia you'll see mostly on the sides of the highways in drier areas. It can handle a lot of saline, so right on the side of the highway where there's a lot of salt. The Russian thistle you'll find quite often in gravel pit areas, railways where it's really dry, where there's a lot of gravel. And kochia, very softly hairy. Another name for it is burning bush, so it is sold as an ornamental. The Russian thistle, it's the typical western tumbleweed. It'll grow in a nice mound, very almost spiny little narrow leaves, very inconspicuous flowers. So, but look for that striping on the stem, and I mean for this one anyway, goosefoot is pretty obvious. Okay, so that brings us to the pink family. Pink or Caryophyllaceae, you're looking at plants that are quite fuzzy, hairy, opposite leaves, round stem. So if you're looking at a plant that has opposite leaves and round stem, it's a very good chance, especially if you're in the field looking at weeds, that you're in the pink family. Pink family includes plants like white cockle, night flowering catchfly, chickweeds, as well as cornspurry. It's called the pink family because the flowers are notched. It makes it look like they're notched with pinking shears. So it's 5 petals, but they're deeply grooved, making it look like they would have 10 petals. White cockle and night flowering catchfly can be fairly difficult to differentiate when they're young, but by this stage, when you feel the plant, night flowering catchfly will be sticky. You'll see small insects that have gotten caught by the plant and died on the plant. It's not eating them, but it's that sticky. Also, white cockle, you will see it blooming in full sunlight. All through the day, you'll go by it and you'll see it in bloom. Night flowering catchfly, like the name implies, night flowering, it is going to be blooming either in a very overcast day or at night or at dusk or dawn. So sometimes you'll go past a patch for days and days and days and you won't see it, and all of a sudden you go by there when it's very overcast and bam, the flowers are open, very, very obvious. If you look at the Weeds of Canada and other books, it'll give you other ideas as far as counting the number of veins on the calyx, for instance, but I'm not going to go into that detail right now. You're looking at the pink family, opposite leaves, hairy, chickweed, night flowering catchfly, white cockle. The black sheep of the family is cornspurry, so even though it's pink family, it has whorled, very soft leaves, and when you crush it, you get a very distinctive smell of corn. So even though it's pink family, it's not opposite leaves. And finally, it brings us to the geranium family. So storksbill is the only geranium family weed that we have to worry about. It's, well, if you're south of the 49th parallel, this is the one that is referred to as red stem filary. It has opposite leaves, round stems, very hairy, especially when young, and you'll see that tri-lobed cotyledon, which is extremely distinctive. I'll find you a Bicknell's geranium, which is a native geranium plant, and you'll see the difference. But this, if you look at storksbill, this is already a 5-leaf plant. And most herbicide labels that talk about being able to control storksbill, and there are not very many of them, you're already looking at a plant that is beyond the ability to control by a lot of herbicides. It's very hairy, so it makes it a little bit more difficult for herbicide to get into the plant. Very, very fast growing, and quite often you'll find plants that are spread out 5-6 feet in diameter. So it's a good sized plant when it's growing, and it'll grow up and actually take down the crop because it's just basically just vining all over it. So what we're looking at now is geranium family. This plant is Bicknell's geranium, so it's a native plant. It's not a weed, but people will often wonder what it is, and people will confuse it with storksbill. Flower, very similar, that nice little purple flower with the little dented petals. When it goes to seed, you'll have a beak coming out of here, and that's where the storksbill name comes from. So unlike storksbill, you're not dealing with fairly long leaves. You're looking at kind of a more typical geranium divided leaf. A little bit hairy, opposite leaves, and that one's pretty obvious to have the opposite leaves, but if you look at storksbill, in a lot of cases it's just a rosette, just either a good size rosette, so it's very difficult to tell that the leaves are opposite. but this one makes it a little bit more obvious. So Bicknell's geranium, really its claim to fame is that it does get mistaken for stork's bill from time to time.